Ahoy! Would you like to learn how to play LeBron or improve your gameplay just a little bit with some new tips and tricks? Then you've come to the right place. In this video, we'll first talk about his general playstyle in 1v1 and in teams. I'll talk about some specific settings that I recommend for him. We'll have an ability breakdown that includes some more advanced mechanics and some small combos that you can utilize. And we'll talk about his perks and perks that I would generally recommend for him. Let's begin with his playstyle. Now LeBron is classified as a bruiser that is hybrid between horizontal and vertical, but I would say a lot of his attacks overall still work better in the horizontal plane. Compared to many other bruisers, however, he has a slightly more support-ish playstyle. As a bruiser, he is not the best for dealing damage or tanking, and he also has some relatively short hitboxes and only a single armored move. But to make up for that, he has insanely safe ledge denial and the potential to finish off people at relatively low damage taken in various ways. The major downside of LeBron is that he constantly needs to take care of his balls. Thank you, I'll be here all week. Seriously though, not being in possession of one of his basketball unlocks a secondary moveset for both his normal and special attacks, and for the most part, this moveset is significantly weaker, so you want to try and have a ball on you at most times at least. Now, it is worth noting that currently LeBron is neither anywhere in the top 1v1 player list or in the top 2v2 player list in the top 30s at all. So he's probably not one of the strongest characters, at least not yet, because people may need more practice with him, but I think he has some significant downside as well, such as a very long cooldown that kind of hold him back. What I will say is that I personally think LeBron is much more suited for 2v2s than for 1v1s. We'll get into the specific details later on, but I just generally think his setup potential with a teammate is so much better, and his follow-up potential and his potential to knock enemies out, the ability to use his basketballs effectively and have a bit of breathing room if he ever uses them and doesn't have one at hand, it all just feels much better to me personally in 2v2s than in 1v1s. Now, as I said, there's one important thing about your settings that, in my opinion, you should adjust for LeBron specifically. And that is, if you go into your settings, you go to your controller or mouse keyboard, whatever you're using, and you go down here to the neutral inputs. And I think it is very crucial for LeBron specifically to have a neutral input for his neutral special. And that is because his neutral special is this basketball throw. And you don't want this to require you to stop every single time because, as you can see, this combos very nicely into other abilities if you can do it quickly while moving. So I think it's very important to have the neutral special bound to something that you can easily reach and that you can easily use in a match when playing LeBron. It also makes it much easier to do directional inputs like this one, for example, because you don't have to worry about accidentally using the wrong ability when using any of these inputs, because it's gonna be neutral special every single time, and the ball is gonna bounce however you want it to. Now let's look at the attacks. His neutral attack, when he has a ball, is a charged up armored attack that knocks enemies back at the end of it. Does a reasonable amount of damage. It is very telegraphed with a relatively short range though. If you can charge it up while an enemy is about to land, the armor can maybe help you hitting them. So it is something you should definitely get used to using, especially because otherwise you will often use these same attacks too frequently and get attack decay from that. And this is a nice one to mix in when you can. At higher percentages, this is also a pretty decent knockback tool. As you can see, you can knock Shaggy almost off the map here. If you throw a ball after them, you might just be able to finish him. The side attacks, these three swings that kind of carry you into the air, and this also lifts the enemy with you. This can be comboed into other attacks as well, like for example this one. Here you can see that I do two side attacks and then just do an up attack instead. That works too, and it reduces the attack decay a little bit. So it depends a little bit on the angle that they're flying in, but generally it's a very nice and easy combo, and it puts the enemy very high into the air for you to follow up with other things. And as I just shown it already, this is the up attack. It just spins the ball very briefly, but it's not an up attack for the full duration, so if they get hit a little bit later in the frames, they won't actually get hit by the ball anymore. It's just a very instant attack, and you should interpret it as such. The visual flavor of the ball here doesn't really matter all too much. There you can see it quite nicely. The ball was still out, but Shaggy didn't actually get hit by it anymore. And then we have his down attack, where he spins this ball around him. This has a hitbox behind him too, so depending on what part of the attack the enemy is hit by, they will take damage a little bit earlier, a little bit later. This is a nice self-heal ability, but it doesn't have armor, so you can get interrupted quite often when using it. His aerial neutral attack is actually very similar. spinning the ball around him in the same way, only that this time he is in the air, but you can also hit enemies behind you. His aerial forward attack is actually pretty nice in that it combos into his normal forward attacks, so depending on what angle you hit them from, you can basically just keep spamming your forward attack and you'll be able to get some easy hits in on them. His aerial down attack is a decent spike. It's not the best, but it does its job. The hitbox is surprisingly okay. It kind of looks very short, but it's not the worst compared to some of his other abilities. His up attack is also quite decent. He throws the ball above his head, and you can deny a decent amount of area with that. His neutral special allows you to throw your basketball forward. And the moment you do that, you also lose your basketball, which is important later on. What you can do with this, again, you can do directional inputs. You can, for example, press down and you kind of bounce it off the floor. You can press up and it bounces a little bit higher like that. And you can also do a so-called no-look pass, which is you turn away from the enemy, you press the neutral special, and then you immediately press the direction the enemy is standing in. So in this case, I'm pressing to the right. What happens is I pass behind me. This is something we'll come back to later because it actually plays a role for one of his perks. If you don't catch your ball, for example like this, then you are without a ball. But if you now use your neutral special, you get another ball. This is on a relatively long cooldown though, as you can see, so you want to avoid losing your ball when possible. And that brings us to his forward special, which in my opinion is the strongest ability for beginner players, but gets countered very, very hard once you're facing more experienced players. What this does, it lobs you into the air, slams on the ground, and kills at a relatively low damage percentage. So far so good. This also has an additional benefit. It applies weaken to enemy, even if you don't hit them with the initial ball, but just the follow-up projectile, so you can deal more damage to them and knock them back harder. Just to demonstrate that, normally my hit here does 2 damage. If I apply the weaken first, my hit now does 3 damage. So you want to have this applied to enemies when you can, but it's very, very difficult. Keep in mind that the side special has a pretty decent range though, so I can, for example, be around here and still apply the weaken effect. Depending on where you hit them, they may or may not get knocked out by the waves that follow. Sometimes that will be enough, sometimes they will knock them out, but sometimes depending on the angle, they need to be at a slightly different percentage in order to get knocked out. But that's not all this ability can be used for. It can also be used as a bit of a recovery, because it gives you a little bit of extra air time, a little bit of extra air space. You go up just a little bit, and you can dodge out of it, so you can kind of use it as an extra movement tool while in the air. You can even do that twice technically, so yeah, you can see how much that gets you around. And not only that, you can actually deal damage with this ability, and you can still cancel it. So as I just showed you, you can just dodge out of it at any point. If you do that while Batman's in the air here, so you can see I dealt damage to him, knocked him down a little bit, but I still have my ball because I dodged immediately. Using this effectively and comboing it into other things can be quite a game changer because it can throw off enemies a lot, because they're gonna predict that you're gonna do the slam every single time and they're gonna play against that. But if you throw a ball at them instead, you keep your ball and you still deal some damage to them. Both of the abilities that I just showed you are also where your teammates come in because they can catch your balls. So you can either throw a ball directly at an enemy and then your ally will catch it afterwards when it bounces back, or you can throw the ball at an ally and the ally can catch it. Now that the ally has the ball, they can use it to help you. I can pass the ball to Shaggy, and he can then throw it at the enemy. And as you can see, it bounces back here as well. And what happens when it bounces back is you can follow this up. So you can see there, I got a dunk immediately, because the ball bounces into the air, and this enables an immediate follow-up dunk from you. This works every time, and in my opinion is a much more effective way to actually confirm the dunk, because the enemy is already in a state of being knocked back by the ball, so it's going to be much easier for you to actually land your follow-up hit. And as that is one of your strongest knock-up abilities, it's very valuable, and in my opinion makes him better in 2v2s than in 1v1s. One of the most underrated attacks that LeBron has, in my opinion, is his down special. He slams the ball on the ground and it bounces up and down for a little bit. If you hit an enemy, it kind of knocks them down once, but it doesn't repeat. It's just a one-time thing. Why do I think it's underrated? Because you can utilize it against an enemy and kind of block off an area. I can slam the ball down here, go on the other side, and I can knock Batman into the ball and pick the ball back up. I haven't lost the ball. I've used the ball to my benefit now. I've dealt damage with it, and I've effectively denied that area from the enemy. The same can also be done from the air. It's the same ability essentially. and you can once again knock them into that. You can technically even use your second ball to knock them into the first ball, but then you're kind of running out of balls a lot quicker. While the ball disappears eventually if you wait too long, I generally think this is a much safer way to use it quite often, because you can't really lose it by yourself. Your enemy has to specifically use an ability to counter the ball, or just has to stay away from it, because otherwise you just pick it back up and you just try again. It doesn't matter if you miss compared to the forward throw, where if your enemy jukes it, you simply lose the ball. That is, of course, unless you're playing in a stage like Scooby's Mansion or Cromulon, where there are walls on the sides and the ball can bounce back from those. Those stages, in my opinion, especially Cromulon, are very strong for LeBron anyways. Additionally, his down special is also an extremely effective and easy edge guard. If you stand on the ledge, you can simply throw the ball down with no risk to yourself, and if anyone is below you, they get hit by the ball and knocked out. LeBron's up special also throws his ball. But look at this. This is his normal neutral throw, and this is his neutral throw while holding up. This is slightly higher, and this is his up special. So depending on which exactly you use, the angle at which you throw the ball is going to be a lot higher. If you're going to go even higher, you can even hold the up special, in which case you're going to have a hard time even seeing the ball. That's how high it goes. So if you're precise with this, you can really hit enemies at all different angles on the map. I'm just going to try and follow this ball, but yeah, you can see it just going out there at the end. So this may be something you want to use against a Shaggy that's charging up. But again, high risk as well, because you could easily lose your ball while doing this. All of LeBron's air specials with his ball in hand are pretty much identical to what he would be doing on the ground. You can throw the ball forward as usual, and you still have the same extra control where you can throw it a little bit lower, a little bit higher. So if you can get a really good feel for that, you will constantly be able to throw it at an exact angle. You can still throw the ball up with the up special, and you can throw the ball down by pressing your down special. And I like this one as well. This is a very nice opener in many matches, because the enemy will often run at you or wait for what you're doing. They don't expect you to stay in the air and slam a ball down at them. And again, if you miss, you still have that ball. So this is a very nice ability to utilize. His forward special is also the same. It's much easier to cancel because you have a lot more time to cancel from the air as well. So you can really go ham with this. So now we've talked about what happens when you have a ball, but what if you don't? What if you lost both of your balls? Well, your entire kit changes. Instead of having a ball in your hand, you now use a variety of grabs and slams, and this has one particular purpose. If you hit an enemy with these attacks, you get a ball from them. So a smart enemy will immediately play a heavy dodge game the moment you lose your balls, because you kind of rely on hitting them in order to get the balls back. Now, what's worth keeping in mind is that the attack actually has to hit the enemy with your body or with your hand. So the down attack, for example, has a bit of a slam, but doesn't return a ball if you hit them with a slam. You have to be close enough to hit them with the hands in order to get a ball back. And this applies for all of these abilities. And these attacks are pretty much intentionally terrible. The attack animation is very, very slow. The wind up, it takes very long to actually hit an enemy, and most other attacks get priority. Likewise with the down attack, which actually feels pretty good when it connects, the attack itself has very, very, very long wind up. The up attack is something that you can kind of get away with if an enemy is under you. It's kind of okay, but generally speaking, all of them feel kind of atrocious. The only attack that doesn't require you to directly connect your hand with the enemy is your neutral attack, which kind of charges up, and even at the maximum range, you get that ball back. That set is also extremely telegraphed, so while it does good damage and it gets your ball back, the enemy has to be a little bit blind or in a very unexpected position to actually get hit by that. You can use it on a shorter charge and you still get that armor very quickly, but generally I found it relatively hard to actually confirm on an enemy. I don't need to explain all too much about the air attacks because they also kind of mirror the ground attacks here. You have this forward attack, which is a forward grab. You have a down attack, which really doesn't feel good most of the time. You have an up attack, which is kind of okay. The only one that's different is the neutral attack, which is this double chest bump, which does an okay knockback and okay damage, and also gets you the ball back. But you have to be careful that the enemy isn't under you and just spiking you while you're trying to do this. So in general, I would say these attacks are relatively weak and on purpose, because they can kind of combo into your normal kit. If you go for a side attack, you immediately get your ball back and you can do the full combo on them, and then suddenly it's not so bad anymore. The down attack can be comboed in a similar way, but really, you have to confirm it with the part that hits the body itself, and that's incredibly difficult to do most of the time because it has a very short range on that. But your special attacks also change, and not necessarily for the better. Obviously, you do not have a neutral special because that is how you get your ball back once the cooldown is over, so you can't use that to attack in any way while it's on cooldown. What you do have is the side special, which is this relatively short forward dash. It's okay, but it has relatively short range, and in terms of hitbox and hurtbox, it loses a lot of trades. For example, it looks similar to Finn's side special, but Finn will win that every single time. And that's true for many other abilities too, so I would use this with caution. His up special is his chalk move, which as you can see here has a relatively short range. You can get relatively close to the enemy, but you can actually use it from the ground to knock them up, different from the up attack. So if you're fighting on the ground, then the up special is a little bit better, but again, relatively telegraphed, relatively slow. Before we talk about his down special, let's quickly look at his aerial attacks. Again, the side special here is pretty much the same thing, but the up special is a little bit different. Instead of being this chalk attack, you actually do an up attack, kind of collapse above you, and it gives you the chance to get a ball, which is not the case for the other abilities in his special moveset. So this is probably one of the more reliable options to try and get a ball back. Everything else kind of somewhat more risky in comparison, but it requires an enemy to be above you. As you can see here, the side special does not return a basketball. What can return a basketball is the down special. Now, this ability blocks projectiles and turns them into basketball. But one thing that's worth noting here, if you look at the timer next to the ability that shows up every time I use it, it's much shorter than the animation of the ability. So keep that in mind. It's going to be very important. This part of the ability at the end does not block projectiles. And what's cool about this is you can also use it in the air. So this is a very unique ability that can kind of turn the tide against projectile spamming enemies. And to demonstrate that, let's have a look at Velma. Suddenly, we have a ton of balls to work with. Obviously, you can't use them all at once, but when you get attacked by a projectile from her, you can just steal it every single time. And then you can use those balls, and if you slam them on the ground like this, you can actually just keep them there and choose to use them whenever you want to, which comes naturally because you're gonna be spamming down special already, and if you do it really well, you can kind of just double spam the balls after that. So a lot of options open up against projectile spammers. Thing is, there aren't that many projectile spammers where you can really use it effectively, but the few that exist kind of make it a very fun ability when you can use it effectively. As far as I can tell, Buck's rocket does not count as a projectile for some reason, so that is one you cannot absorb. One specific thing to be cautious about is Superman's freeze, because if you throw the ball into the freeze, it will actually just get frozen. Even if you pick it back up afterwards, it doesn't turn into a basketball again. It's now this frozen projectile which you can throw at an enemy, but it no longer is the same basketball that you can use for other effects, and you can't really use the same abilities with it. You are limited to the kit that you use when you don't have a ball. Now, LeBron's perks are a little bit of a headache to me because in my opinion, the worst one is the one that you start out with, and it's not really a suitable one for beginners at all, if not generally a relatively weak one. So this is Hot Hands. If LeBron completes a no-look pass to his ally, the basketball is ignited. If LeBron dunks an ignited basketball, he ignites all damaged enemies and creates a firewall on the ground. Now, why do I think this is bad? Well, first of all, you have to do a no-look pass. And a no-look pass, on ping especially, doesn't feel reliable in my opinion. Yeah, it works, but often enough you actually may end up throwing the ball in the direction that you are looking into anyways, or turning around right before you would throw the ball and then not having it count as a no-look pass. Between those two, with latency, I think it's very unreliable to be used at all. So let me demonstrate what it would look like. This is the ignited ball and this is the slam dunk, and then there's this firewall here. The benefits you get for the off chance of this actually happening and the massively increased risk that the ball will actually end up flying in the wrong direction is, in my opinion, absolutely not worth it ever, pretty much. His next perk is 4-3. This makes it so that when you throw a basketball at an enemy that is far away, it will actually detonate, have additional damage and knockback, but disappear in return. So as you can see, at a shorter range here, the ball exists, deals 4 damage. At a longer range, it explodes and deals 12 damage. Technically, seems nice. It's a lot of extra damage, kind of knocks them down. Not bad in itself. The problem is now you don't have a ball. And in my opinion, LeBron's secondary kit is so much worse than the one when you have a basketball that it's extremely hard to justify losing that just to deal some extra damage once. It's not like this ball gets massive knockback or knockout power at all. Look at this, this is at 91 and still. It knocks him back a fair bit, but far from something that would be a knockout at any reasonable range. And losing the ball in return for that is just bad when it could bounce back instead and you could do more with it. And that pretty much just leaves you with one more perk, which is keep possession. When LeBron or his allies receive a pass, they gain gray health for a few seconds. And this perk, in my opinion, is very good, because a pass also means the ball bouncing back to you. So, you can easily get it, or you can give it to an ally. This is something that's not super situational, it's something that frequently happens in a match, especially if you're playing right with your basketball. So I don't see any reason to ever consider any other perk of the three at this point, simply because the other ones are just way more conditional or not effective enough, or actually give you significant downsides. So this is LeBron's normal projectile speed. And this is LeBron's projectile speed with Make It Rain Dog. In my opinion, this perk is pretty much a must-have for LeBron. 20% projectile speed is extremely massive for a character that pretty much entirely revolves around them. I do think that stacking it is not really worth it because it's an extra 5% on top of what you already have, so it's not really a massive increase comparatively. Another perk that I really value with LeBron is Retaliation Ready, especially in duos. Your team grants allies 3 gray health for 3 seconds after knocking back enemies with projectiles, which you very frequently do with LeBron. I like to play LeBron in a way where my teammate can go in deep into the fight and I can interrupt with basketballs and then slam in once they use an attack. So what you can do is you can throw a projectile, and if your ally catches it, they immediately have 6 gray health, 3 from one of your passives and 3 from the main effect, from his main ability. So that's something that in my opinion works very well, and you can also give yourself gray health. So throughout a match, you will constantly get damage reduction in one way or another. Your last perk is extremely flexible. You can, for example, do triple jump. That's something that is commonly used. But of course, you can also opt for other things like additional projectile damage, or you can do something like ignite on projectile. There are a lot of things that can be done with projectiles that can help you further, but there's also a lot of defense tools you may want. It really depends on who you're playing with and what your playstyle is mostly. Now, if you enjoyed this and you're interested in more Multiversus guides, then please consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you get notified. I'll have some general beginner tips soon as well, so stay tuned for that. Also, please let me know in the comments if there's a particular character you'd like me to make a guide for. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one soon. Sloth, out.